I think we all know that global society is getting closer to the marine transportation system, especially with its demands for performance. What they are looking for is accountability and transparency. This is augmented by social justice organizations raising awareness through global communications, prompting companies such as Patagonia, IKEA, Cargill, and others to demand performance indicators. Investors, too, are scrutinizing these metrics, begging the question, how does your company measure up? How will our industry be judged on the world stage? How will our industry meet these demands? To examine this decade of demand, I invite Roy Bleberg and his panelists to take us through what they feel are the demands and what is expected of our industry. Roy and the rest of the panel.
Thank you so much, Carlene. I really appreciate the opportunity to lead this panel. Once again, my name is Roy Bleberg. I'm the Vice President of Business Development with ABS out of the Houston office. And it's my pleasure to be able to join you this afternoon with a actually very distinguished panel. We do actually have a couple remote participants. And is Natasha Brown online? Oh, I see. Yay. Okay, there you are. Great. I guess can you guys? Oh, very good. Okay, great. Thank you so much. So what I was, well, first, let me do my opening remarks. I'm going to keep it kind of short because the decade of demand is a very intense subject. I think we've already heard from Chris and others of how important it is. But the way I see it, the shipping industry has always been driven to perform. The world depends on it. And now into the future, demands continue to grow. These drivers stem from regulatory drivers, public perception, public expectations now, much less the all-important decarbonization. These demands stem from resources, from financial resources to human resources. What do you think about the crew? Think about the crew and industry that we have to really attract new talent to the maritime industry. So these demands continue to grow, and I think we have a great panel to be able to address that. So today we have an excellent opportunity to hear from a cross-section of our industry, to hear about the challenges of these demands and hopefully bring some solutions as well for the conversation. The way I'd like to set this up is what I would like to do is maybe do a very brief introduction for each of the panelists, and then maybe give them 1 or 2 minutes to describe what they do within their organization. First, thank you, Chris, for joining. Thank you for the keynote, and thank you for joining the panel. So you got an opportunity to meet Chris Warnke, the Chairman and President and CEO of ABS. Online, we have Natasha Brown. Natasha is the head of IMO Media and Communications team. She joined the IMO Public Information Service team in 1997 and has extensive knowledge on all those workings of IMO, at IMO. So, Natasha, can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can perfectly.
Great, great. Would you like to maybe just give us a one or 2 minutes of what you're doing with IMO at IMO?
Okay, so I mean, as you said, I head up the media and communications, so our job is to inform the world, the people at large, about what IMO is doing in terms of regulations. And obviously this audience knows what IMO does pretty well. I'm sure that you know that we drive the regulations towards, safer, cleaner, more efficient shipping. And we're looking to try and make this, we've been trying over the past couple of decades, perhaps, to make it more transparent, to be more transparent about what IMO is doing, and responding to those demands that were mentioned in the previous speakers about societal demands. They want to know, what is IMO doing? What are the countries doing in terms of regulation, in terms of addressing decarbonisation, digitalisation, diversity, and the due diligence that was mentioned by Carleen there about, IKEA, the charterers, the customers are asking, where are our goods coming from? How is it getting here? How is the regulatory body regulating the shipments, and how are the welfare of the seafarers, and making sure that shipping is cleaner and greener? So these issues are really important, I think, and even more important now because society does demand more transparency.
Great. Thank you very much, Natasha. I appreciate that. Next, I'll point to Randy. Randy Givens with Navigator Gas US. Randy is the Executive Vice President of Navigator Gas US. Prior to joining them, he was the Vice President of Jeffries. Randy, you want to say a few moments?
Yeah, so
Great,
thanks so much. So with Navigator Gas, I've been there for about 7 months now after 11 years as an equity analyst. So seeing both sides of the shipping has been a fun experience here. Navigator Gas, we are the world's largest owner of handy-size LPG carriers. We're moving petrochemical gases like ethane and ethylene, liquefied petroleum gases, propane, propylene, butane, butadiene, and ammonia. We also own a 50% ownership in the ethylene export terminal with our joint venture with Enterprise Products Partners down where I'm located in Houston, Texas. So Navigator, our motto says we are connecting the world today and creating a sustainable tomorrow. So we're certainly going to be part of the energy transition. We have approvals in principle for ammonia propulsion vessels, as well as eventually the transportation of CO2. So sustainability is certainly at the core of our strategy, and we're looking forward to participating in this panel. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Randy. I appreciate that. And now I'd like to turn to Sam Davin from the World Wildlife Fund in Canada. He is a senior specialist in marine conservation and shipping. He leads the work on work related specifically to pollution, voyage planning, and decarbonization, and serves as a representation at IMO. So Sam, can you hear us?
Hi, Roy. Great to be here.
Yes,
hello
please.
to you, my fellow panelists, and everyone in the audience today. So as you mentioned, should I go ahead and do my introduction,
Yes,
Roy?
please. Yes, please.
Okay, well, as you mentioned, I work for World Wildlife Fund Canada as our senior specialist in marine conservation and shipping, and I am speaking to you today from Ottawa. In my role, I sit on our IMO delegation and work on a wide variety of issues as well as their solutions, including marine fuels, greenhouse gas emissions, short-lived climate forcers like black carbon, pollution and discharges, scrubbers, underwater noise, and disturbances and vessel strikes on marine mammals. I will also say that in Canada, I engage at the Arctic Council with others at the Protection of the Arctic Marine Environment Working Group, which looks at a number of the same issues that I just mentioned. And as an organization, WWF has been working for over 50 years to protect nature, and today we are part of a worldwide network that is operating in more than 100 countries around the globe. Within Canada, we are the largest international conservation organization, and we do have the support of more than 150,000 Canadians who are committed to producing the conditions that reverse the steep decline of wildlife, both within our country and abroad. And I guess I would just wrap up by saying that today we're facing the reality of a dual crisis, both with biodiversity and climate. We see global wildlife populations have declined by over 60% over the past 4 decades, and in parallel, we've seen global temperatures rise by almost more than 1 degree Celsius since the Industrial Revolution. So WWF Canada has invested significant resources and time to increase understanding and awareness about sustainable shipping practices, which of course influence biodiversity and the climate. And we're committed to driving positive outcomes that can be achieved through positive, appropriate, and timely mitigation measures. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and look forward to the rest of the good discussion.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So now I'd like to turn to David Levy with OrbitMI. David is the Chief Marketing Officer. He joined the firm in 2019 after the company's spinoff from Bulk. He's been instrumental in advancing OrbitMI's innovation related to sustainability and the reduction of carbon emissions. So David, you have opening statement and tell us a little bit about what you do there.
Sure, thanks, Roy. In addition to being the Chief Marketing Officer at OrbitMI, I get involved in strategic partnerships. I'm often the executive sponsor of particular clients and customers that we have. But Orbit is a software as a subscription and data as a subscription company. We are headquartered in New York. We have offices in Serbia and in London and Greece and Norway and in Sweden. We have a integrated suite of products which addresses a bunch of different maritime use cases, anything from maritime intelligence to noon reporting, operations, weather routing, chartering, compliance, and the way, Chris, you had talked about the importance of data is kind of mother's milk to us in terms of why we're here. And I'm looking forward to participating in this panel to talk about, from the software and technology standpoint, how we're helping address demand and what we see those demands are.
Very nice. Thank you, David. Appreciate that very much. And Longji Yieldjep is a senior corporate development analyst for Dorian LPG. He has actually been leading the Dorian's effort for decarbonization. He has an undergraduate degree in economics from Brown University and a master's degree in finance from Golden Beacom College. So, Longji, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been doing with Dorian LPG, please?
Thank you, Roy. I work at Dorian as the senior corporate development analyst. I've been with Dorian for 7 years now, ever since I graduated from Brown in 2015. I lead our research and analytics department, working closely with our performance department in analyzing our speed and consumption and vessel efficiencies. A little bit about Dorian. Dorian LPG is a LPG shipping company and a leading owner and operator of modern VLGCs, meaning very large gas carriers. Our mission is to provide safe, reliable, and clean, trouble-free transportation of LPG, a mix of propane, butane. We also provide commercial and technical management services in-house, with our commercial team sitting in Copenhagen and our technical team and marine team sitting in Athens, Greece. We own 22 VLGCs, and we also co-manage ships within our Helios LPG pool, which is partly joined is a joint venture with our partners, Phoenix Tankers. We have 13 scrubbers on our vessels, 12 on our owned vessels, and 1 on one of our chartered-in vessels. We are also focused on the decarbonization efforts. We are a signatory to the Global Marine Forum's Getting to Zero Coalition, and we also are a signatory to the Poseidon Principles. So I look forward to having this discussion with these distinguished panelists on the efforts within our industry to decarbonize and get to zero.
Thank you, Longji. I really appreciate that. It's a great transition, getting to net zero. So this is what I would like to do. I think I'd like to ask the panelists a few questions, and I'll try to spread the questions around as best as I possibly can. Carlene, I'm going to look to you to let me know when I need to open it up to the audience, if that's okay. I know we're trying to go to 2:30, so we'll try to keep it on track. Oh, 3:30. I'm sorry, 3:30. I'm sorry, I'm still in Houston time, so very good. But I hope, but you guys consider your questions. Start thinking about the questions you would like to ask this panel, because it's a very distinguished panel indeed. So I'll start off. A question to you, Randy, actually. With the stated goal by many, we even talked about it just now, about net zero being in 2050, and it's such a large scope. We talked about ESG, we talked about green corridors, all the technology that's needed to support this effort. What do you think the drivers creating the most significant new demands on shipping are, from your perspective?
Yeah, as you mentioned, it's certainly going to take a lot of different players to partner into that lofty goal of decarbonization and net zero by 2050. But fortunately, right, interest is aligned between financiers, the banks, customers, charterers, the shipping companies themselves to really get to net zero by 2050. And obviously, it's going to be a progress, right? So 2030, we have some lofty goals internally, and I know most shipping companies do as well, to make a lot of steps here in the next 8 years, well before 2040 and obviously the end goal of 2050. And in terms of the all-in cost, we've done our own analysis and looked at others, and it's likely maybe 1% to 2% for the end customers. So that's certainly manageable and something that will be important for shipping, not to bear, but to pass along to customers. In terms of Navigator specifically, we're on all three fronts looking at financing new vessels and in secondhand acquisitions with green linked financing, right, to continue reducing our emissions that way and kind of having that incentive. We also publish all of our emissions, so very transparent in our sustainability report that we publish every year. We've continued to do so on that front. And then obviously working with charterers and long-term charters and even short-term charters for best optimization of the fleet and really kind of decarbonizing in the near term and using Orbit and other kind of data providers to help us in that energy efficiency. So that's really the goal, that we're taking one step at a time. And, our goals are certainly well before 2050, but we do think as a whole, when everyone is aligned as they are today, we should see a lot of that progress here in the coming years.
Great. Thank you, Randy. Appreciate that. Speaking of that, you mentioned David there. David, from your perspective, what do you think the most significant new demands are on shipping, and what have you guys been working on to specifically support that?
First of all, I want to commend my sales team, because the fact that Randy mentioned Orbit means my sales team is doing a good job, because I know we've been talking to you guys. So good job, guys. Okay. I'll tell you, I've been on a number of sales calls. As a marketer, it's important for us to get close to the customers. And I'll tell you what I have not been asked for was, can I get me some of that digitalization? Right, I need one of those. You got one of those, I'll take two of those, right? Digitalization is a means to an end, okay? And what is that means and what is that end? Companies want to get the value out of their data, right? Shipping companies, these are the biggest products on the planet, and they're just data generating machines, and everyone knows there's a ton of data there. I need to get my hands on it. I need to be able to process it. I need to be able to put it to use. I need to find insights from it, because data in and of itself is just useless, right? So we need to have software and other methods to turn it into things that people can use. So the demands that we're getting are kind of basic demands. How can you help me save money? How can you help me reduce bunker consumption? How can you help me reduce my carbon footprint? How can you help me make my vessels and voyages operate more safely, right? Can you help me understand the weather better? And so what we're being, as a software provider, what the demands on us are more, can you show me how it works? Because there's a big market out there, and you guys know there's been hundreds, if not close to 1,000 new software companies that have been minted over the last several years, and everyone's got a message. But now we're at the place where customers, the demand for us is, I got your message. I read your website. I read your white papers. Show me how it works, and show me how and where in your product you can help us save money, reduce bunker consumption, et cetera, et cetera. So to your point, Randy, what you were saying is the market is becoming a lot more savvy and aware about what some of the solutions are. And now what we're finding is we are being asked, okay, show it. You're here, now show me the money, so to speak.
Great. Thank you, David. Appreciate that.
One more thing, as Chris mentioned, in terms of kind of public buy-in, right? In recent years, the public image of shipping hasn't been that great, right? When you think of oil spills, or when you think of The Economist and all these European papers talking about scrubbers and how, we're saving the air but killing the fish, right? So clearly, we do need to do a better job of just public awareness and our image of cleaning up on that front as well.
Great. Thank you, Randy. As a matter of fact, Chris, I had in your keynote, you addressed several different things that were new demands, but if you had to pick one, or maybe two, of the biggest new demands on industry, what do you see from your perspective?
Thank you, Roy. Kind of going back, we've got a lot of things going on right now in our industry. We've got everything from clean energy transition, we've got digitization, you've got post-COVID repercussions, and of course you have all sorts of geopolitical dynamics kind of in play. And all of this kind of coming together, quite frankly, is in many ways driving kind of a new family of global shipping shapers. We talked a lot about regulations. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But, these global shipping shapers, kind of give birth to a new language of shipping. Everyone is talking about dollars of CO2 reduction per ton mile. It's also causing us to look at a new set of boundary conditions. Everything from unintended safety consequences to the role of government to infrastructures and where all that kind of fits in. And that kind of begins to lay out for us new timelines. I mean, we're all moving into this, and we all probably have a short game, a mid game, and a long game. And we all recognize that in that process, things are changing. Commercial relationships are changing. I mentioned that CII is going to bring us together. Listen, when the light turns green and we start moving down those CII trajectories, it is all of us together moving down that. It is charterers, it is owners, it is everybody, and it's those regulations, the EEXI and CII, that are kind of developing for the industry strategies, decarbonization strategies. Most shipping companies these days are looking at their trajectories, looking at the age of the fleet, and quite frankly, having to rationalize which vessels do we retrofit, which ones do we sell, and which ones do we replace with new construction. And on top of all of that, we're going through a little bit of a dynamic right now between energy security and energy transition. So lots going on. I think, again, to put it back to the calculus and the perspective from a shipping point of view, a ship, the ship answer to decarbonization, 70% is in the fuel, but 30% is low-hanging fruit. 15% of that is data digitization. How do I just drive energy efficiency, improve my optimization? Another 15% is with kind of low-cost capital energy efficiency requirements. So we got to take advantage of the low-hanging fruit in the short game. Got to keep our eye out on transformational technologies as we move into a mid-game, a long game, and even a longer game. Things like carbon capture, things like energy efficiency, driving the cost of electrolyzers down with green hydrogen, electrification, battery energy storage. But it's just causing us to kind of think a little differently as we move forward, recognizing that things are going to be different now.
Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate that. So as a matter of fact, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Randy had mentioned about the public. I'm going to switch gears and I'll ask this question to Natasha. Since the Ever Given grounding and a lot of the port congestion recently has come to the attention of the general public. We have a lot of attention given to the maritime industry, and sometimes it's not without risk associated with that. So Natasha, what steps does the maritime industry need to take in order to meet this newly found recognition? And I'll leave that to Natasha Brown, please.
Well, I think we need to, take on board that risk, be transparent, be open. There are some great stories to tell about shipping. The Ever Given literally showed what shipping means to all of the world. From IMO's side, we've instituted several different international days throughout the year, which provide an opportunity for any ship company, any ship master, anyone who's on Twitter or TikTok or any kind of social media to jump onto those days. So we have the Day of the Seafarer, which has been running for more than 10 years on the 25th of June. We have the new Day for Women in Maritime, which is a great opportunity for the maritime industry, for shipping companies to show what are you doing in order to promote diversity within the industry, and that's on 18th of May every year. We then have the World Maritime Day at the end of September, but we've now instituted that as a whole theme for the year. As you can see on my screen there, new technologies for greener shipping this year. So asking companies to share, what are you doing to get ready for CII and EEXI? Tell those stories. I think the maritime industry needs to stop being shy and reticent and needs to be out there and telling those stories about the good things that the majority of the industry is doing. So be more transparent and be ready to take on the risk that obviously that goes with that.
Thank you, Natasha. Very well said. Thank you so much. As a matter of fact, so let me ask Sam, maybe I'll turn it over to you. What about from your perspective with regard to public outreach and public perception?
Yeah, thank you, Roy. So I would agree that shipping is in the public spotlight now, maybe more than it's ever been before. And from my perspective, I see this as a good thing. I see it as an opportunity for the maritime industry. It's a really good time to begin a dialogue with the public, but also not just the public, but also elected officials and bureaucrats about the challenges that the industry faces, as well as some of the solutions. And frankly, to get credit for adopting some of those solutions. For many people in the public, shipping falls to the background, but it's crazy that that's the case considering the outsized role that it plays in our day-to-day lives. It's also a chance to communicate the supports that the industry needs from government and other stakeholders to achieve some of the positive outcomes that are needed. But as your question implies, the spotlight cuts both ways, which means that the stakes are higher. It's clear that the industry will need to take meaningful steps in the coming years to address some social and environmental issues that it does contribute to, namely climate change and chronic pollution, like I mentioned earlier. Although there are certainly plenty of high ambition actors within the industry who are already taking these essential steps, or are already well on their way, by and large, many others still have a way to go. From where we stand right now, there's strong scientific evidence that we need to see urgent action to avoid the worst effects of climate change. It's worth a reminder, I think, at every opportunity to say that, the Paris Agreement goals of limiting warming to below 2 degrees C, it's not safe. It still avoids some of the worst impacts, but we still cross multiple tipping points, most likely, under those scenarios. And so to this end, I think what the public needs to see and should see is the industry investing in energy-saving technologies, be it wind-assisted propulsion, low and zero life cycle carbon emission fuels, batteries, shore power infrastructure, both on ships and at ports, and fuel cells that can deliver all on air quality and climate benefits. And on that too, something that gets talked about a little bit less because of the climate issue is the pollution issue. And so I think, the public would appreciate seeing a change in the way the incidental wastes are treated and disposed of. For example, we know that in Canada, ships are producing around 147 billion liters of operational waste each year. And there are steps that can be taken to improve how that waste is handled, treated, and disposed of. One of the steps that we would advocate for would be to adopt a practice of not discharging these incidental or operational wastes within designated protected areas that are being set aside for long-term conservation of nature. And to me, that's a really big win, not only for the environment, but also for publicity. I think it's good business. And I think, as was mentioned in the previous question, there are low-hanging fruit that can be addressed that haven't been. And, I think here I'll just wrap up by saying that, I recognize that more often than not, regulations can lag the issues. And I think this leaves the door wide open for industry to step up and get ahead of the issues and claim credit for that. That could be anything from saying no to investing in future stranded assets to not discharging in protected areas to adopting in some of the green measures that I discussed earlier. And I think if these steps are taken voluntarily, the industry can expect support not just from the public, but also from regulators as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Sam. I appreciate that. So I think what I'll do is maybe I'll ask one more question to the panel, and then I'll open up to the audience if it's okay. So, Sam, you mentioned about operational waste, and you talked about decarbonization and all. This one stems around, we talked about actually resources, so financial resources associated with it. So I'll kind of direct this to Longji. Sometimes shipping has been on the radar for investors, sometimes not. My question is, what attributes do you find that the investors to shipping need, and where are we today? Where do we see that today?
Thank you for that question. Well, I would say most investors, disruption creates opportunities. And so in our sector, the past few years, we've seen a lot of disruption, starting with the COVID pandemic, when people were locked down at home so they can increase their demand for services, they started demanding more goods. And then for ships were not available to meet that resurgence of demand. Therefore, the earnings for most of these companies were higher given the increased demands and disruptions to supply chains. We also saw the delays given with the Ever Given in the Suez Canal and the port congestions we saw in both the U.S. Pacific coast, in India, in China. So those also created opportunities for shippers to earn more on their earnings. And then again, another disruption we're seeing is the war in Ukraine, where the ships are being rerouted. Now we're seeing more of the energy demand coming from Europe, going from North America to Europe, and those are new routes that are opening up as well. So you're seeing more opportunities there for earning potential. So that's, I would say, the attractiveness of the industry now, and that's also reflected in the stock prices of most of these energy companies now that you're seeing compared to 2020.
Well, gee, thank you very much. Appreciate that. As a matter of fact, maybe Randy, you want to do a follow-up on that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. If the question was, what kind of drives investors to shipping, if you asked me 8 months ago, I would say really good sell-side analysts, like myself at the time. But now I would say a really good investor relations professional. So, but in reality, it's really a four-pronged answer, right? The first is kind of a positive global macro backdrop, meaning you need to have a good outlook for global trade, for shipping demand, as well as a favorable or at least stable outlook on the supply side. So I think we have that. Secondly, when it comes to individual shipping companies, right, you need scale, both in terms of fleets as well as market cap. In my 11 years at Jefferies, I was never asked, what's a good shipping company with 7 ships and 80 million market cap, right? People wanted size, they want scale. Third is all about balance sheets, right? And we've seen what happened 2011 to 13 in dry bulk and 15, 16 tankers and others, where it's just really rough times. So you want to have very low debt to kind of reduce your downside risk, but also having that upside potential for big return of capital to shareholders when earnings are good. And then lastly, now investors even more so in the last couple months and years, really focusing on ESG and especially corporate governance, right? No one wants to deal with related party transactions and crazy fees and public-private kind of company conflicts and kind of poor stewards of capital. So fortunately, shipping and many companies in the shipping kind of universe, especially Navigator, checks all 4 of those boxes, right? So that's why if you look at year to date, shipping's up 25, 30%, the markets are down 25, 30%, right? So a very large divergence there. So currently, there is some good investor appetite in shipping.
Thank you, Randy. Appreciate that very much. So what I'd like to do now is take a few minutes to open it up to the audience. Is there anybody that would like to ask the panel a question? We have a question to my left.
I learned from the best, Carlene. We've had 3 major pipeline issues: Colonial Pipeline, and then the freezing in Texas, and now Nord Stream. And we just had the entire inland waterway of Russia with the Kerch Strait Bridge. That's the out gap there. As we move to this energy transition, we're talking about methanol, we're talking about hydrogen, we're talking about explosive gases. Companies like Navigate and Dorian have done an excellent job securing those, making safe operations, as ABS has pushed these things in. But a lot of these risks are coming from external. So are we going to move out of the pipelines into ships? And how do we keep those ships secure in this geopolitical? I see the Coast Guard here, who's at every conference, but I don't see anyone from the Navy. So what are those security implications? Thank you.
And takers on that?
Start us off.
Well, I'll go ahead and kind of kick this off, and then hopefully my colleagues will kind of come in behind me. But listen, that's a great question. There's a lot going on. I think one of the things that we are seeing now in terms of protecting risk and ensuring resilience is the importance of not just IT on the cyber side, but the OT side. I don't think we spend enough time with that from an industry point of view. And this is kind of the industrial operational controls piece, just because of the fact that we have quite a lot of cyber-enabled physical systems out there. In the world that I live in, safety is now becoming much more synonymous with cybersecurity and with reliability going forward. And I think that's going to be really important as we begin to again track through kind of our short game, mid game, long game, and actually look at our risk profile as we move forward, because it gets back again to the boundary conditions of availability and scalability, of unintended safety consequences as a result of change, kind of the role of governments. I think we need to kind of make sure we understand that. And before I turn it over to my colleagues, I want to put a plug in because we haven't talked about it, and quite frankly, we don't talk enough about it. But underpinning all this is people. Okay, people that's a big deal. The real heroes, the people are going to be people. You know, we talk a lot about technology, but it's people. Because and what's really important as you move forward, we talk a lot about fuels, but you know what? The way we develop talent is changing. It is no longer just experience and training. It is skills and continuous learning as you look at this next generation of critical infrastructures that are moving forward. And of course, always remember that technology has no common sense, no instincts, or no sense of humor. So it's people that are going to be kind of underpinned in this risk profile going forward.
Yes.
Thank you, Chris. Please.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. With regards to your question about whether we're going to go more with shipping than the pipelines, I would hope we do. It would be helpful for us at Dorian LPG to move that energy via ships. But I would say that given what we've seen with the pipelines, especially with Nord Stream, and how those people, how the Europeans are now trying to get their energy through ships, the important thing is a collaborative effort by all parties involved, especially with port infrastructure, because most of these energy projects are coming from North America, coming on bigger vessels, and the infrastructure is not there for those areas. The plans are there, but it's not yet solid, right? So we're still hoping that that collaboration will come to fruition and then kind of give that liberalization, energy liberalization to everyone else, where you can choose how your energy comes to you. And most people, we know shipping is one efficient way to do it. Most of global trade, 90% of it is via ships. And we're responsible for just 3% of GHG emissions. And we're already proactive in reducing that, given this example, this conference that we're having, right? We're having those discussions. And then the IT part of it, yes, there's that big risk because there's the OT risk, there's the IT risk, and at Dorian we take that very seriously. We do continuous training of our staff, our crew. Everyone is well informed on the IT risk and how those risks can come to fruition if you're not precautious, especially via email. Phishing emails is the big one right now, and then all of a sudden your ship can be taken over by a hacker, or all your sensitive data and all your information that you have to supply to ports are being restricted because you've been locked out of your system. So we do that a lot. And then on the people side, we saw what happened during the pandemic with our crew changes. So that's why all stakeholders need to be involved in this, because it was really troublesome or burdensome trying to get our crews repatriated to their home countries and back. And with this war in Russia too, you're seeing that as well, where the Russian crews are trying to get out of the country, and those who are done with their service are not trying to get repatriated back to Russia. So it's all stakeholders, all hands on deck need to be involved in order to mitigate those risks that you speak of.
Yeah, and I think the optionality and flexibility of shipping is a huge benefit, right? Fortunately, God put a lot of water on the earth, so there's many routes to take. Instead of a pipeline, you're kind of stuck there. And in terms of Navigator specifically, that S and the social and the safety is a big part of kind of our core competency. Obviously, the commodity we carry is valuable, but the 20 to 22 people we carry are priceless, right? So really focusing on, all right, what's going on in certain areas, staying away from the Strait of Hormuz when there's missiles going off, and staying away from Russia, Ukraine when there's mines in the water, and all those things. So really staying active and being proactive in terms of rerouting or whatever it takes to get the commodities and more so the people there safely.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate the question.
Roy, I just want to ask
Chris.
one more thing, actually. You know, we talk about shipping for shipping and shipping for the world, but we have actually a wonderful example. When you look at the amount of carbon capture that we need going forward to get to 2050, I think the number was 100 times more than we have right now. You're not going to get there by pipeline. You're going to get there by ships. And in fact, you're beginning to see, in fact, we have 2 LBG operators. You guys are operating in that zip code right now. The emergence of an LCO2 market, which, you know, some analysts will tell you that that has the potential that there be more of those types of vessels than LNG vessels that we see right now going forward. And there's a great example of, you know, shipping for the world, using shipping to be able to transport that CO2 in order to make that next generation of blue energy fuels before the green energy fuels are scalable. Wonderful example of that.
Great, thank you, Chris. Really well said. Appreciate that. How about another question from the audience? I see one to my right.
Introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Robert Walker. No relation to Carlene Leidenwalker. Great panel. Question is, several of you have mentioned the importance of consumer perception and paying attention to that. And I guess my basic question is, to what extent are you keeping an eye on where consumer perception is going, and how might you think about that and pivot to that if needed for certain issues that might be coming down the road, other than people wanting to stay warm in the winter and getting their iPhones and so on and so forth? But from a perception standpoint, is that becoming more important to you in terms of how you're thinking about and managing your business? Thanks.
So maybe I would, for that one, would you like to direct it to a specific panelist? Yep.
David Levy, I think, talked a little bit about that, because you were talking more, the level playing field of many businesses it's becoming flatter, right? So, which is redundant, but that's another point. But you were talking really about delivering the insight, delivering the benefit, delivering the real result to the customer. And so that was sort of the genesis of my question.
Great, thank you. So I'll repeat it just in case. Maybe Natasha or Sam might want to chime in as well. But essentially, if I understand the question correctly, is consumer perception increasingly playing a role in the way you operate your companies? So why don't we start with so David? I'm sorry, I walked away. Dave, would you like to start? And then if you would like to, maybe Sam or Natasha would like to chime in as well.
Sure, I'll respond, and I think mine will be relatively narrow in scope, Robert, because we're a B2B company, so we're selling to other businesses. And so we're trying to be as responsive as we can to our customers and our prospects as we possibly can be. But for us to do a good job, we need to pay attention to what our customers' customers are asking for them. And so again, to play off the theme that I began on, when we're being asked to show the results, the results are a little different, right? It's not just, well, how can you save me money? It's, I'm under tremendous pressure from my board to show that we're being compliant or that we're operating in a more green fashion. So how can your platform help us demonstrate that? So we are kind of bleeding through towards our customers, but obviously our primary customer is the people who are paying us for our services.
Great, thank you so much. Natasha or Sam, would you guys like to give your opinion specifically with regard to consumer perception?
I'd be happy to quickly jump in.
Please.
In my view, there are several different avenues through which people sort of become attuned to the issues that are associated with the shipping industry. And I think something that we haven't touched on today are some of those. And so when we think about some of these implications, we think about who is implicated, and we look to other ocean users in that case. So specifically, for example, the fishing industry or indigenous and subsistence communities who are using the ocean on a day-to-day basis for their livelihood. And it's sometimes through these other stakeholders that the issues associated with the shipping industry come to the forefront, be it through the media, through word of mouth, through organizations like my own. And so when considering sort of the perception of the shipping industry and the perception of the impacts of the shipping industry, I think I would encourage members of the industry, be it ports, ship owners, operators, whatnot, to consider these other ocean users, because oftentimes this is how issues are brought, in my view, to the forefront.
Great. Thank you very much, Sam. Natasha, did you want to add on anything? I wasn't sure.
Yeah, not much more to that. I think Sam, nailed it with all the different stakeholders that are involved, that interact and interface with the shipping industry. And obviously for IMO, because we're a member state organization, so a big issue that comes to the fore might then lead that particular member state to come to IMO to raise that issue. But also, again, we have great collaboration with the NGOs from all sides, from the industry side and WWF, and all the NGOs representing the different environmental groups. So they can also bring issues to the fore where there's been a big consumer perhaps reaction or perception. So by that way, we can provide that forum for those discussions and perhaps address some of those issues and perhaps highlight what has been done or what is being done, so that we can raise that to the fore and say, look, these issues are being addressed, because sometimes there's very little knowledge out there, because we are IMO is well known within the maritime sector, but it's quite hard to become well known beyond that. But I'm sure there are more ways, and there is more work that we can do to do that, with the help of the shipping industry itself, as we mentioned before, with being more transparent about their work.
Thank you very much, Natasha. I appreciate that very much. So it sounds like we have a few minutes for one final question. Is there someone that has a nice short question?
Casey Scott, ConocoPhillips. I have a short question. I don't know how about the answer.
Might be a tough answer. That's right.
The question, so we're looking at a number of projects that could lead to shipbuilding in the coming years. A number of different types of ships to be built in the next few years. So the question is, what does net zero by 2050 mean? And so to the panel, and in the context of if ships last 20 to 25 years, that means that technology needs to be ready to be implemented in 3 years for some ships, and certainly by 2030, all of this technology is to be up and running if true net zero is to be achieved by 2050. So the question is, what does net zero by 2050 mean to the panelists, and specifically IMO as well? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Casey. I appreciate that. Anybody would like to?
I'll go ahead and start, because I guess, quite frankly, I think that, so that question, the answer to the question to some ways kind of starts with what's the driving force and driving function, which is the regulations. I mean, you can start just by looking at the CII trajectories right now, which, by the way, are based on tank to weight, not well to weight. But if you bought a ship today and you looked at those trajectories, and there's a lot of work needs to be done collectively, a conventional vessel with very good energy efficiency, you can basically go 10 years before your grades change on your CII trajectory. An LNG vessel is a 20-year vessel right now, based on the current regulations and requirements if you drive those trajectories, until you have to make any sort of changes. And if you look at not green methanol, but gray methanol, that's basically a 15-year ship. So this is the importance of these regulations. They need to kind of, we need clarity and consistency, because you've got different views of CII trajectories between the Poseidon principles, between IMO, and although industry is doing a great job trying to stay ahead of these regulations, at some point these regulations, you got to land on them. And by the way, dimensionally, you have also a lot going on between Europe right now. It is quite possible, and we've seen scenarios that between IMO and Europe's fitness for 55, you can actually have a vessel that will meet IMO requirements, won't be able to trade in Europe, okay, because of the disconnect relative to some of the regulatory development that is going on. You look at the current order book right now, 30% I think of the world order book is LNG. You look at what ship owners are doing right now. I mean, they got a pretty good script. They're doing everything they can to drive efficiency into their existing fleet. They're kind of looking at pilots, whether it's biofuel, looking at B30, looking at relationships with charterers relative to an LNG dual fuel vessel, or looking at potentially, methanol or something. Ammonia, listen, the engines aren't out yet. This is going to take a little bit of time from that point of view. They're kind of developing their own risk profiles as a company relative to the fuel risks, and taking decisions based on business decisions based on relationships with charters. I will tell you that once CII starts, the charter and the ship owner are going to be, it's a whole different relationship, because the charterers and the traders all have skin in the game in addition to the ship owner. So a lot of these things kind of come together relative to timelines, but in my mind, from where I sit, and I'm kind of very, kind of skewed and biased, is obviously the regulations kind of become probably the single biggest global shaper that we've seen in a long, long time.
Yeah, I think Chris did a great job there summarizing it. It's just clarity on regulation, because right now it's so fragmented, and we don't want we're in a tight position as ship owners where you can't really invest in any future vessels right now, because then you're going to be stuck with stranded assets if the regulations change. And so you want to keep your assets performing in the short term or in the interim. We can't really look out to that far, 2040, 2050. Most of us don't know what's going to happen in 2025, right? So that's when we'll have sort of more data on how the AER and EEXI and CII performs. So we'll have to wait for that clarity from the regulators. And as I said before, it has to be a concerted effort by all stakeholders, especially with the challenges to the CII and the way it's calculated with port stays. Who's going to bear that risk of the port stays? It's something that's out of your control. It's out of the control of the ship owners. It's out of the control of the charterers. That's why we have to have all parties involved in making these regulations, so that we're not butting heads when they come into force.
Great. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate that opportunity. And so we're out of time, but obviously the demand on our industry is very high. I think you've done a great job of bringing some solutions and conversations to the mix. I do think overall the maritime industry is on the right path. So with that, please join me in thanking our panel. Very nice job. And Carleen, thank you for letting me participate. And I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy, and thank you to ABS for hosting this panel, and thank you to all of our panelists. I do want to say hello. I don't know if Natasha's still with us. In terms of how you can help with public perception, I know that certainly David mentioned he's a B2B, but IMO announced a program a couple of weeks ago when I was in London called IMO Cares. Now that's a nice public name. That's a great statement, IMO Cares. And it stands for Coordinated Actions to Reduce Emissions in Shipping. Great. But what a wonderful way to project the work that we are doing and the steps that we are taking. So at any rate, it's time for a break. So enjoy, talk to all of our partners in their kiosks, have some snacks and some coffee and whatever other beverage you've got, and we'll see you back at 4 o'clock Eastern Time.